Want to sell more books? Make sure you're at the Self-Publishing Show live this summer. Meet the biggest names in self-publishing at Europe's largest conference for independent authors. Enjoy 2 days packed with special guests, an exclusive networking event, and a digital ticket for watching the professionally filmed replay, including bonus sessions not included at the live show. Head over to selfpublishingshow.com/tickets and secure your spot now. The Self-Publishing Show Live is sponsored by Amazon KDP.
On this edition of the Self-Publishing Show,
I would feel comfortable writing almost anybody's love story, getting them to an HEA with an external conflict. I would not want to delve into somebody's character who I'm not a part of inside, and having that lived experience to get into any trauma or difficulty or angst around being a member of that group.
publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It is the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson.
Hello, Mark Dawson. And first thing to say is Self-Publishing Launchpad is open for another week, I think, probably when this goes out. So if you have not yet signed up, you've got a week left. It'll be open again towards the end of this year, most likely. It is at selfpublishingformula.com/launchpad. Very, very exciting for us always to get a new batch of authors going through the course. The group gets busy with lots of questions and we start to see people's early successes, which is brilliant. And if you listen to a podcast 2 weeks ago, you'll hear lots of authors' great successes as a result of that. And it's one of the great pleasing things, I think, for you and me and John and the team here at SPF is to see careers properly launched by that Launchpad.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had it was a good episode. Had some really, really successful authors go through Launchpad. And I don't know how many people have taken the course now. It's in the thousands.
Yeah, 7,000 or 8,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really always very pleasing to see that. And had a few emails over the last week or two from people saying when's the course open and they're keen to get in. So that's good. Also, people are saying why can't I get in now or after you closed it? And that's just the way we do things. We only open them twice a year. Each of the two main courses twice a year. It just makes it a little easier for us to administer.
And everyone then goes through. You get a batch of a few hundred students going through at the same time, helping each other at the same time. It does work. Everything works properly for it.
It does work, and also just from our perspective, it's busy. It's a very busy time for us, and I couldn't really sustain that kind of level of interaction over the course of a longer period or interminably, just because there's other things that need to be done. So we're quite close to making, I think, quite a big announcement with regards to one of our other little businesses, and something else bubbling away in the background as well, potentially, that might be coming out towards the end of the year.
There is lots going on in the background, and it will all eventually become public. But it's when it does become public, I want you to think back to this period in mid-2023 and think how many meetings with lawyers Mark and I have had.
Yeah,
on top of everything else.
Quite a few. Luckily, I am one, so it's been has been quite helpful. I'm actually negotiating with. I'm doing loads of law at the moment. I'm doing a contract with I can't announce this yet, I don't think, but we have a new course coming out with someone, which I think is going to be really good. And that has involved quite a lot of legal backwards and forwards, and with me dealing directly with her lawyer just to try and iron out a contract, which we're pretty much there now. But we were getting to the stage of moving commas and dotting I's and crossing T's. I had to kind of say, this is it now. Anyway, but we're there, and quite pleased to get that done, and very, very excited to get that course out.
Whilst I love lawyers on an individual level, I do hate the whole process. I hate it as a business person.
I've gathered that. Yeah, it doesn't.
I find it's characterized by lawyers saying you've got to have this, you've got to have that. Same as insurance, and then the moment you need it, saying, well, it doesn't really cover that, or there's no point in going to court. Well, you know,
a good contract, i.e. the ones that I'm negotiating, will always cover everything. So we wouldn't find ourselves as exposed as perhaps we have done in the past because someone else did the contract.
Let's see, because lawyers always say, there's no point in going to court.
Well, no, there's no. That's what the contract avoids. That's the point. It's so clear. There's no point. There's no dispute. So yeah.
Okay. Anyway, enough about lawyers. We love lawyers individually. Right. We are going to move on to talking about digital accessibility. You might not have known it exists. Every now and again, you get prompted to put in the description for a photograph, perhaps in an email, something like that. But there's a lot more to making your marketing, your books, your emails, everything that goes around it as accessible to as many people as possible. And there are two people who are experts on this, and they are Jeff Adams and Michele Lucchini. And I spoke to them very recently. They have a book that helps you, and they've got a giveaway as well, a PDF. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be very useful to get you started. A little checklist to make sure that you and I are doing everything we can do to make our work as accessible to as wide an audience as possible. After all, that is money on the table, is it not? Okay, let's listen to Jeff and Michele, and Mark and I will be back for a quick chat.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Jeff and Michele, welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. Lovely to have you here from, I think, at least one of you on the West. Are you in the same location, both West Coast?
No, we spanned the globe today.
Oh, go on then. Michele, where are you?
Italy.
You're in Italy. Wow.
I am.
You're like a near neighbor for me then.
Oh, yeah, I am. Yeah.
Whereabouts in Italy are you?
Northeast, quite close to Venice, close to the Alps.
Nice. Just hop over there, do some skiing. Good. I'm going to Venice for the very first time next month. I think I sort of get the feeling it's the place where they're going to ban tourists at some point in the future. So I think I better go quickly before that happens. And Jeff, I know you're California way.
Exactly. Yeah. Central California near Sacramento.
Yeah. So Jeff, I mean, people may know you from the Big Gay Fiction podcast, which has been going some time, I should say. I don't think maybe we started before you, but it's close, and I know you've got a lot of episodes under your belt.
Yeah, we're at 417, I think is where we are in the week that we're recording. 417, 418, been going since 2015.
Oh yeah, you're actually older than us then. You've been going longer.
By just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, kudos, because we know what it's like doing a weekly podcast. It's a lot more work than people might think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's quite a lot. We, at the beginning of this year, to allow for other creative projects, we actually scaled back to going every other week.
Oh, really?
So reduce the number of episodes by a little bit, just to give us a little more room to take on other projects.
I lie awake at night dreaming of doing that. Maybe one day. Why did you start the podcast? Did you feel there was a gap in the market, a need?
You know, there was a definite gap, and there's still a gap, really, in terms of podcasts that look at queer fiction. We kind of stay in a niche of queer romance fiction because it's what my husband and I love to read, and it's also what we write. And at the time, 2015, there were some romance podcasts for sure, and romance podcasts that would occasionally touch on queer fiction, but there wasn't like the podcast that did it. And in the time that we've existed, there have been some that have started and ended, because podcast fade is a real thing when you figure out how much, work it takes. Recently, a new podcast has come up, a shout out to the Low Angst Library, podcast that is looking at queer fiction, especially low angst queer romance fiction. So we hope that they have a nice lengthy life. They're new. I don't think they've got a dozen episodes out yet. But it's nice to see somebody else come into the space because, this niche of queer romance and queer fiction broader has grown substantially over the last few years, as a way that everybody gets to kind of find themselves in a book. Which I think is so key.
Yeah, and it's one of the things independent publishing's done is to serve more markets in a more subtle and nuanced way than trad did before. But it's not you're not just romance now, are you? You talk about all across different genres.
Yeah, romance is the primary focus, but if there's especially queer YA is another spot that we look at really closely, but we also look at more broad queer fiction. It all comes down to what we're reading in the moment, and if we see something that's like, oh, this is really good, let's get the author. We'll branch out. We've covered memoir, we've covered children's books. It just it's our show, and we'll bring on the people that we want to talk to.
You do what you want. Funny enough, I interviewed Claire Lydon last week or the week before. It hasn't been broadcast as we're speaking now, but we'll probably have by the time this goes out. And Claire writes lesbian romance fiction here in the UK, or sapphic as she now calls it. And she made the point, which I didn't really think about, is when a few years ago when she was looking around for lesbian romance to read, probably because it was lesbian and gay, it sort of had a load of other stuff attached to it, like quite heavy-duty storylines and issues and stuff. And she just wanted to read romance, and that's why she started it. Did you find the same sort of thing? You said this is what you like to read, that there was always, for some reason, in the queer fiction sector, there seemed to be some other stuff loaded into stories?
Yeah, there could always be the struggle of being queer and of coming out, and it's certainly going through the 80s with the AIDS epidemic. There was, that aspect of it. I'd like to read a world where queer people just get their happily ever after. With whatever goes around with that, you could have a ton of external conflict, whether it's romantic suspense or something going on in a fantasy world or whatever that is. But let the queer couple come together and have their happy, overcoming whatever they need to do. And that's, one of the reasons that we started writing it. I mean, even when we started, there was a decent amount of, especially male fiction out there. But yeah, that's what we wanted to read. So we decided to write it too. Yeah.
Okay. So you writing that, we'll talk a bit about your writing individually, but Michele, you're sitting there very patient. We should talk to you about your writing and your background. So first of all, how did you get to know Jeff?
Well, Jeff and I actually work together. I've been working together for over 10 years for a company called UsableNet, which primarily focus is accessibility. So we offer services and technologies to companies that are putting together an accessibility program. I think that I can say that we probably dedicated a good portion of our life to accessibility, and working together, knowing that Jeff, was a writer. The idea popped out. It was initiated by Jeff, saying, "I think we need to help authors and entrepreneurs on at least understanding how to start with accessibility." And I jumped immediately on this idea, and that was my first writing experience. I come from a very technical background. I got a master's degree in computer science, but during my study course since the early age, I always loved writing. I was actually performing better in literature and those kind of courses rather than the scientific ones. And that was an opportunity. And also, given the fact that, my mother language is not English, was even a nicer challenge to get. And we were both very intrigued about the idea of working together on a project that was connected but very unrelated to our day-to-day job.
So there was a writing bug in the background there, and we'll talk about the book, obviously, in the subject matter in a second. But has this ignited something for you? Do you think, Michele, you're going to write in the future?
I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you that we are working on the Italian translation of the book, and why not? It definitely clicked, and it was such an interesting and lovely experience that, to be honest, the next one, I will want to do it with Jeff again. I'm not sure I'm ready to do a solo writing experience, but yeah, why not? Why not?
Sounds like something's going to happen there. It's nice to know that you got on together in this writing process and you're still smiling at the end of it, because creative processes, whilst they don't always end in angst, but they can be trial. I'm sure there were some trials and tribulations along the way. But let's talk about the book then. So first of all, maybe Jeff, I'll ask you this. Is this a book aimed at people who require accessibility, or is it aimed at the general author community to be aware of bringing accessibility into the way that they do everything?
The latter. It's really aimed for people who have websites and social media accounts and email marketing that they do. So we really pointed it at what we termed in the broader as like creative entrepreneurs, whether they're authors or podcasters, or maybe they make jewelry, or they're making art of some kind, or they're musicians, or whoever that is, who is probably running their own business. They may have a team, perhaps, who works with them, but they're creating in WordPress or Wix or a platform like that, and using MailerLite or CreateKit or something like that for email, and they're posting on social media. And they need to understand how to make the content they're producing accessible for everybody, because just the way that we, let's say, do it by default, and I certainly, did this for a number of years, don't necessarily take into account all the things that you can to make something accessible for truly everybody, instead of smaller portions of your audience. So you could be leaving people behind who want to engage with you, who for some reason cannot. Okay,
and I suppose, Michele, the central business thing here is it's about a commercial aspect to your job as well. This is not just being nice for the sake of it and including more people. It's actually making your audience bigger.
Yeah, there's definitely an implication related to the business model. It is clear. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense to bore everyone to death talking about numbers and statistics, but just doing a summary, around 20% of the population has a sort of disability. Also, I think that the important aspect is not just about emphasizing the ethical aspect, not just about emphasizing the business factor, but accessibility should be, everyone's expectation. Is not an accessory. That, I think, was the main driving force for our initiative, and what we try to leverage in order to convince people to start doing something.
Yeah. And I presume you're the technology side of this, so I'll ask you this again, Michele. The ability to make everything more accessible has never been greater now than it used to be.
Yeah, there are guidelines to follow, and the guidelines are evolving, and together with the technology. If you think about the need, right, of accessing the web, in particular after the pandemic we have gone through, that maybe force people at home, force people to go online just to buy food or other main needs, develop this need indeed to help yourself and operate on the web. This just amplified something that was already a minimum requirement, and that had a chain reaction on new technologies, new expectations, a new guideline that will be delivered soon by the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. It is an ongoing activity for, let's say, everyone working in this space. But yeah, if you think about years back, the evolution has been quick, and the future will also show that it will improve furthermore. There is this concept which is a sort of saint graal for the design, which is the inclusive design. So design and implement something that works for everyone, independently by everyone's abilities.
Okay, Jeff. So I suppose if people listening to this think, well, okay, well, what should I be doing? Can we start with some sort of practical tips for authors listening?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what the whole book is designed to give, because we don't want to make these authors and podcasters and such feel like they have to have a big technical know-how to do some of this stuff. We've narrowed down like what Michele and I talk about to our usable net clients and really honed it down to the things that people working in those platforms that I mentioned can do. So, fundamentally, some of it starts with good colors. Use good colors in what you create so that the text can pop off of the background. So that everybody has a good chance to be able to see it well and sharply. Because you think about people with low vision, people with some cognitive disabilities, for example, like dyslexia, where they might need to have some super sharp letters to read to be able to parse the words right. Same things if you're using like really fancy fonts in some of the graphics you're creating. Think about how that might be perceived by somebody else. And I'm not really talking about book covers there, but I'm talking about like the promo graphics that you're doing. Book covers and product is their own thing. It's how you're presenting it on the web where you need to think about it a little bit more. When you're using images, use a meaningful alternative text with those. And think about it in the context of what you're presenting alongside it, whether it's a social post or something on your website or something in your email. Think about if you put your hand over the image, like if it's on your screen on the page and you put your hand over it and you can't see it anymore, what do you need to put in the alternative text for that image so someone with a screen reader will understand the story they need to get from that image and how it relates?
Yeah.
And if in fact you can cover that image up with your hand and you're not missing anything, then you leave that alternative text empty because it's a decorative image and nothing more needs to be said about it. The other thing I'll throw in about alternate text that's important to think about is when you're doing it on social, Facebook and Instagram will pre-populate it with an AI concept of what it thinks the image is. It is never what you want it to be.
It's a long way. So as a bare minimum, you need to go in and check that because it could be misleading.
Yeah, and you can't just leave it blank, which is the unfortunate part. Because sometimes you don't need it because it's all in your post, but you've got to put something there so that it's not just, 3 people maybe inside one with a beard, which might be how it describes our Zoom, screen at the moment.
Yeah. I actually like writing the alternate text. When I put covers in, I obviously do a lot of adverts in the Fuse world and my own books in Vellum. For instance, you put an image in there and you go into the alt text. I quite like describing a soldier walks away from camera in a foreboding atmosphere in dark weather. You can create a nice little word, a picture sentence there, which is quite a fun thing to do from a writing point of view. So Michele, I guess coming back to you, there's 2 things that are sort of jumping out at me here, 2 different things. One is what you do that everybody sees and consumes that could be better for people with certain conditions, like we talked about high contrast, bold colors, easy to read text, and then there's things that you can do that people who are viewing it with certain equipment or have settings set on their browser that they're going to access, and these are sort of 2 different things, aren't they?
Yeah, there are 2 different things, but very, very much related. Let's consider the way we should look at our audience. It would be probably a mistake start making distinctions between disabilities. So it would be a mistake, and probably it will add the complication to our work if we start thinking about, okay, let's start working just to accommodate blind people needs. Then let's work to accommodate motor disabled needs. The recommendation is to simply follow what exists, which is the guideline that we explain and distill in our book, because the guideline contemplates all kind of different abilities and combination of disabilities. The good of the assistive technologies is that normally they are platform independent, meaning that you do not have to build the website or the page or your post to support a specific technology. The technologies are respecting these standards and normally are interfacing with your browser. Nothing more than that. So you can ignore what kind of technology your user, your customer is using, as far as you respect what the guideline asks you to do. So this means that you will assume that every screen reader will perceive and announce in a consistent way the alternative text that Jeff mentioned. So in case there is an empty alternative text, the screen reader will just skip it. In case the alternative text is described, it will announce it properly. If I can just make an overarching point, James, I think that one of the goals of the book was certainly provide some very clear and practical how-to. But I think that there was also something more between the lines, which was stimulating questions. So I think that one of the goals was to help people finding new questions to ask themselves. There is a cultural transition that when you start embracing accessibility, everyone makes, which is what I like, it doesn't count a lot now, because together with what I like, I also need to consider what everybody can perceive. In the author space, it is absolutely correct thinking that I'm writing what I like, I'm producing what I like. But there is probably another question is, am I sure that what I like is also what somebody else can perceive? There was in one of the interviews that Jeff and I did writing the book, there was this person that says, well, I really like that color scheme. I love it. That is what I want on my site. And that was extremely inaccessible. And this person didn't even realize that was complicated to see for a wide majority of people, not simply people that were colorblind, but another big segment of customers potentially may have troubles just interpreting that color scheme and the content conveyed using that color scheme. So asking good questions is the road to success for accessibility. And it is not in the book, but happening in these kind of interviews that we did. That we recommend also to try to challenge your everyday's life with questions around, is this accessible? Or can this be implemented in a better way? From an handlebar to open a door for anything else. It is a process that is very helpful to going in the right direction also when you'll do your work of creative entrepreneur.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And actually, Jeff, it was going to be one of my questions, which is, will people feel that they're compromising their artistic vision? They're losing the edge of what they're trying to do, and will that cost themselves? I can imagine people having that, exactly the questions Michele sort of spelt out, going through their mind listening to this.
Mm-hmm. This is actually a question that we deal with our larger clients every day. We work with luxury retailers, for example, where brand is everything to them and how they present themselves, to the public, to their customers and potential customers. And it's really about learning the guidelines and understanding the guidelines, and then bringing that to bear on what you're doing and understanding how to make things accessible. It's rare that you have to compromise what you're trying to do to meet the guidelines. The trick is not just going, well, I really like this thing and I'm just going to use it, but taking a minute to understand more fundamentally, this is what I want, this is what the guideline says, and then how do I get there to kind of meet in the middle. I think even for luxury retailers, there's a way to be accessible that still meets their brand ideas. But it's easy to want to say, this is just stifling my creativity. What I feel the guidelines do is actually to help you understand how to be creative and accessible at the same time. The only true, what I would call like the hard and fast rule, is really around color contrast. It's the only place that the guidelines say you must do X to make this accessible with the color contrast ratios that it gives you, which just means you're just kind of nudging colors around until you find that right balance to your background and foreground. So it's not like radically telling you how to do something different. So I think if you go into it with the open mind, you're then able to understand how to apply what it's telling you for accessibility versus, the thing that you want to create. And again, it's not going to stop you either from the product you're creating. It's merely how you're presenting that product to your online audience.
Yeah. And in actual fact, every creative endeavor has a framework and rules and guidelines even before this, whether it's the resolution, the size, the shape, the amount of text. Even Jackson Pollock throwing paint at a canvas is within a framework that he has to constrain himself by. So it's just a case of going in, knowing that these are part of those guidelines. Okay, so this sounds very, I was going to use like a pun, accessible to authors, like an easy laid out way of following the book. Have you, what stage is the book at? What feedback have you had from people in the out there?
The feedback's been really good. I think every time we have a conversation, like a light bulb goes off, like, oh, this thing, oh, I should do that. And nobody sets out to create inaccessible content. It's a matter of, you didn't know you were doing it in the first place. And it's really been embraced, like, oh, I see these things now that I can do. There's a little bit of like, oh my God, there's all these things I should do. Because we highlight 16 things that we think non-technical creatives can and should do. And we try to wrap that in a nice package of, you don't have to do all these things this minute. You don't necessarily have to go backwards and fix your website. It'd be nice if you did, but maybe you're just fixing the homepage or some top pages of things. You're certainly not going to go backwards in your social media and fix stuff there, but you could, do better going forward. The concept of progress over perfection is so key to all things accessibility. If you're doing something, you're doing the right thing. None of us can stop all of our businesses to go, fix the website necessarily, or, fix other things that have happened in the past. We can certainly go forward, understanding what we should be doing and try to just work that in to what we do.
Yeah. Perfection is always the enemy of any kind of progress, isn't it? So trying to overreach. Michele, when you look around, particularly in the author community, I know it's not your home community, but you've obviously been introduced to it in the last year or so. When you look around at websites, at Facebook adverts, at book covers, at blurb and stuff, how often do you look at them and think they could be more accessible? Is this the vast majority of what you see, do you think?
Yeah, it's probably the vast majority, but it is not intentional. I'm sure it is not. If you consider let's not ignore the cultural aspect. If I consider the way disabilities are largely seen, for example, in Europe, so accessibility is too often associated to volunteering. Accessibility is too often associated to somebody that needs to help these people doing something. While in the US, if you look back into the number of years, accessibility has always been associated to independent living, meaning that the cultural aspects for the population, for the country, is fundamental. So this is factor one to explain why the vast majority of websites, books, covers are not accessible. Second point is what Jeff was alluding before. We have an heritage from the past that accessibility means flat design, very trivial look and feel, not sophisticated. that excuse is no longer acceptable. The technology that we have nowadays, as Jeff said, allow us to innovate thanks to the accessibility guidelines, thanks to the accessibility requirements. So that's the second factor, where the designers needs to do, a mind switch. Dealing with the new requirements is not a constraint, is a requirement. And it is not easy, because you live in an environment where accessibility becomes an additional cost, one more thing to do, one more thing that will slow you down. And it is a complicated exercise to make sure that accessibility is no longer an accessory, like I mentioned before, but it becomes a requirement. So just what you have to do. And then I think that the third aspect is the methodology. People, companies, individuals are dealing with accessibility. Very often, too often, accessibility is a final test you do after you already have done everything. And then you have to go back and fix backwards what the test that you did highlighted that was wrong. That's not a sustainable way to handle accessibility. It could be good the first time as a learning process, but the overarching goal for somebody that needs to embrace accessibility and needs to transform accessibility from let's say a project into a requirement is to bring accessibility as early as possible in the life cycle of the product that they are developing.
Yeah, which is a perfect advert actually for the book, I think, isn't it? Because you familiarize yourself with the guidelines and the framework before you start a project.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's familiarizing with the guidelines, and it is something that we try to do with the book. Hopefully we manage to do it. Jeff is right. Progress over perfection is the main message we want to send, but we didn't hide how much actually you should do. If you want to fulfill entirely the guideline, there is a lot to do. Everyone needs to be aware about that. Hiding and trivializing accessibility only to few things, it will have been the wrong message. So you can adapt yourself. You can create a pipeline for your remediation strategy or the things that you want to do on your next projects, only if you have a good understanding of the entire bulk of work that you should do. So next time you can add another piece, another brick, improving ongoing the accessibility of your products.
Yeah, it definitely connects to my own accessibility journey with my websites. You know, my husband and I both have author websites. There's the website for the podcast. There's now the website for this book, which I certainly built accessible. Because it needed to be that way.
Oh my goodness, you had to be really careful.
But it built on what I already knew from building the other websites. All the websites existed as I was getting into this accessibility work. And even for me, because I'm not technical, I'm in the same boat that a lot of these entrepreneurs are, maybe a little more technical than some of them, but it's a matter of updating my colors and getting the home pages right and getting my book pages right. Blog posts from, like 2004, I'm not going back there to fix them. They are what they are in the past. If you think about the podcast, we didn't start doing any kind of transcripting until about episode 180. So we were a long way in, and we're going backwards as we've got the money to be able to fund transcripts in the backlist. But there was a point where we started and it was just the interviews, and then we evolved again dozens of episodes later to doing the entire show as a transcript. So even me, who works in this space day in and day out, I had to evolve and be able to plug it into the sites that already existed. These days, I feel pretty good about where all the sites are. They could all be better, but since I don't work with a developer, and nor do I have the resources to work with a developer, I can't fix some of what's there, but it is the best I can make it. Some of that means leaving platforms too. I'm in the process right now of moving the store I had set up to sell my ebooks to a different platform because the platform I was on was not accessible to the point where I was comfortable giving that to my customers.
Right.
So sometimes it's, just deciding to pull the plug on something and doing the work to make the move. But all these things, as you read the book, you'll start to develop your checklist, if you will, of what you want to do and how you want to do it. Because one of the extras that's built into the book is a download you can do to help you take notes about what you want to do, how you want to do it, so you kind of can form that plan that Michele was talking about.
Jeff, there's one more for you. Is there anything about the content of people's books that you touch on in the book here in terms of sort of like a sensitivity type advice, or is it all about the more technical aspect of presentation?
It's there's little in here about the book, the actual EPUB of a book. And maybe that is the next book that we write, potentially, is getting into the things to think about as an EPUB. And, if you're just writing a fiction book, for example, there's maybe not a lot of images in it, and how to deal with that, where you're really relying on the EPUB format itself to do the heavy lifting for you, and that Vellum's going to kick out the right formatting for the EPUB or whatever Vellum-like thing that you may be using. It's certainly going to be something that authors have to pay attention to, and certainly I've seen in some of the author communities already looking towards 2025 with the laws that are going into effect in Europe around accessible ebooks, and they must be accessible to be sold in the stores. I think it's June 2025. It's definitely 2025 when that is. And Michele and I were recently at the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference in Anaheim back in March. And there were a couple sessions about EPUBs and the things that are coming within the EPUB 3 standard and what those mean for accessibility, and platform testing that's already happening with like Kobo and Google Play and some of those players to make sure that it gets into their systems correctly and everything. So there's stuff there. And, Michele alluded to another book, and maybe there's something around, EPUB accessibility that becomes interesting to put out into the world around 2025, because I think for some authors and publishers in general, to meet those criteria, it's going to be going potentially backwards to deal with, all the EPUBs that currently exist, depending on exactly how that law is written, if there's any kind of grandfathering or not, which I don't currently know if there is. So don't anybody freak out that I just said that, because it's kind of an unknown thing at the moment. But
we're going to have a GDPR type moment, aren't we, when that builds up?
It seems like it might be, because GDPR was a huge deal when it came out and how we all managed our newsletters.
Yeah, exactly. Michele, you should probably tell us what the book's called, where people can get it.
Yeah, we deliver on all the platforms that you can expect. We have also a website that is, has content that we are also regularly posting. We also produce a paper version and a large print version. I think it was in the spirit of making sure we were accessible.
Yes.
And I don't know, Jeff, am I missing anything?
There is an audiobook still to come.
Oh yeah, you're right.
In production on that. And the actual title of the book is Content for Everyone, a practical guide for creative entrepreneurs to produce accessible and usable web content.
Very nice. I'm looking at it now on the world's largest book retailer. It's definitely there in paper and in ebook. Well, really, really interesting interview. I mean, I think it's not a subject we've even come close to touching in our 300 and 400, whatever episodes we're up to. So I think that's really useful. I think the question I was asking you, Jeff, and it might be one for your next project, is about the sort of sensitivity stuff that people have a black character and they're not black, so they get a sensitivity reader, and then there's a bit of a discussion about whether you should do that or not. And we've had a Native American expert on the podcast about that, including Native American characters, not to fall into cliche. There's probably a bit, there's without question a market here. First of all, it would be nice to include more characters who have a disability of one form or another, but then getting that right, I can imagine that is a bit of an area that perhaps could do with expanding.
Yeah, like any group that you're trying to write about that you're not part of, there's always the steps you need to take to get it right, to not be exploitive, to not necessarily get into the hardships of being in that group. You know, I would feel comfortable writing almost anybody's love story, getting them to an HEA with an external conflict. I would not want to delve into somebody's character who I'm not a part of inside, you know, and having that lived experience to get into any trauma or difficulty or angst around being a member of that group and living with that. And I think that's always the thing that people have to balance, at least in my view. You could write any character you want, leaving to the side perhaps their lived experience, and really let the story of that lived experience come from those authors. I've attended some really great courses around that idea and how to also kind of put the critical lens, even as a reader, of like, how did that work treat that subject? And, you know, was that the best coming from that author, or did they elevate a character in a way that was, you know, perhaps not the most appropriate and sensitive way to do it? It's a really interesting area of fiction. And I know sometimes people are like, you know, I should be able to tell the story I want to tell. But then I think you have to deal with whatever criticism, you know, through reviews that you may get because of how you position something that, you know, even if you involve people who are in the community, it still gets dicey when you're dealing in that angsty, like lived experience area. It's I would never want to tackle a book on that myself.
No, it's fraught, and it's an area of active discussion, we should say, but slightly different from our main topic today. But I've enjoyed that. It's been illuminating. We'll go back and I think I need to get the book and start thinking about what we're doing, particularly going forward, as you say, to make it sort of easier and more realistic. Jeff, I think you've got a PDF, a helpful guide for free that our authors, just for listening to this interview, can get. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We put together 7 tips. So 7 brief things that people can start to think about even before, you know, hopefully they pick up the book. We talk about alt text, as we, you know, mentioned a little bit before. We talk about captions and descriptions. Meaningful link text is a thing. Instead of just saying, click here, read more, buy now. Easy to read color combination, so getting to that color contrast situation. The challenges around using images that have text baked right into them. It's a whole thing that can be, you know, there's a world of ways to fix that problem that we put out in that PDF. We talk about emails a little bit, and in particular, balancing how much imagery you're using versus text. I see way too many emails that are just text, or rather picture, which can be very difficult to manage well. And then we wrap that up with a little bit about emoji usage too, and how difficult it can be to parse emojis, what assistive technology will read out about emojis, which probably will surprise some people.
Right.
So it's just a little kind of primer, if you will, for the book itself.
There's so much double entendre in emojis that I guess they probably don't get that nuance in the way it's interpreted by the machine.
Not at all, because the machine has the way that it's going to read the emoji, and it has nothing to do with the context, because the screen reader is not going to figure out the context of it.
Yeah. Okay, well, that sounds brilliant. So that sort of introduction. I mean, some people won't know what we're talking about. We talk about alt text and stuff, and other people will be more familiar, but this sounds like a really good way of just getting a foot into the water of this area that's going to only become more important in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's great. Thank you very much indeed from Italy and the west coast of the US. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Michele, we're looking forward to your literary career that's without question going to burgeon in the future.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, James.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There we go. That is Jeff and Michele. Quite a niche topic, I suppose, but one that... we deal with accessibility in physical world. There's absolutely something to deal with in the digital world as well. It's good to have people on hand who are experts. And as I said, Mark, there is a PDF, a very handy giveaway to get you going on that. If you go to selfpublishingformula.com/accessible, you will get that winging its way to your email inbox.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's an interesting subject. It is something that I'm guilty of not paying enough attention to.
I quite like writing the little description under photographs. I don't know why I like that. But
alt text, isn't it?
Alt text, yeah.
Yeah, no, you do see that on Twitter these days, people doing that. I think Lucy Score does it quite a lot, doesn't she? I've seen that with some of her social posts. But no, it's it is something else that needs to be done. But it is, if you think about making your content more easily enjoyed by everyone, then yeah, it's worth the effort.
Yeah, definitely. Great chat. Thank you very much indeed, Jeff and Michele. It was fun talking to you. Just a reminder, Self-Publishing Launchpad open, I think, for, where are we now? I'm going to have to look at this one. I think this is going out on the 20th, which means you've got a week and a bit to sign up at selfpublishingformula.com/launchpad.
Also means something else. It's a month to our conference.
It is a month to our conference. Very exciting. We've had a rash of ticket sales recently, and we're thinking about selling the last part of party-only tickets. I'm still umming and ahhing about that because we have a maximum fire limit on the building. So however many people there are, that's the seats that effectively everyone's allocated a seat, if they take it or not. So we're getting to that point now. But if you want to come, I would go to the website fairly quickly at selfpublishingformula.com/SPS live. Be great to see you in person in London. Come and have a chat with me and Mark, or even John. I know there are people who travel many miles to talk to John Dyer.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't
the police?
The police, exactly. Yeah. Yes, the police thing. Yeah.
Good. Okay, look, that's it for us for now. Thank you very much indeed to the team who put this together, and for you for listening, and especially if you enjoyed the banter. All that remains for me to say is there's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with The Self-Publishing Show.